It's hard to put into words how surreal it feels to be writing this, laying out all these private, gut-wrenching details about a marriage I thought would last forever. But here I am, because I don't know how else to process what's happened. My name's Daniel, and I was married to Stephanie for 8 years. We had the kind of life I thought people dreamed about. 2 young kids, a home filled with laughter and chaos, plans for a future we both seemed equally invested in. Or so I thought. If you'd asked me just a few months ago, I would have told you that Stephanie was my best friend, my partner in crime, the person I wanted by my side for the rest of my life. She was smart, funny, and fiercely dedicated to our kids. The last person I'd ever suspect of betrayal. We had our routines, our small rituals that made us feel like a team: Saturday morning pancakes, Wednesday movie nights, even late-night talks where we'd make plans for everything from vacations to home improvements. To me, these routines weren't just things we did. They were the glue holding us together. But looking back now, I can see that there were subtle signs of trouble creeping in, signs that I ignored because I didn't want to believe anything could go wrong. It started as something small, like a crack in the paint you don't notice until it starts to spread. A few months ago, Stephanie started acting differently. At first, I didn't even think much of it. She was suddenly more guarded with her phone, keeping it close by her side at all times, turning the screen away when I was nearby. It was so out of character for her that I couldn't help but notice. But I didn't say anything. There were other things too. She started staying late at work more often, saying she had urgent projects that needed her attention. She was always tired, always too busy or too stressed. When I'd ask if everything was okay, she'd brush me off with a quick, "Just a lot on my plate. That's all." I remember one evening when I offered to cook dinner, thinking she might need a break. She looked at me with this odd, almost distant expression, like she was miles away. I asked her if she wanted to talk, but she just gave a half smile and said she was fine. I wanted to believe her. I'd never had a reason to doubt her before. Stephanie had always been transparent with me, always someone I could count on. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more that nagging feeling in my gut grew. Then came our daughter's birthday party, an event Stephanie had poured her heart into planning. She was always great at making special occasions unforgettable, and that day was no different. We had friends and family over, cake, balloons, everything you'd expect. It was supposed to be a perfect day, and in a way it was. The kids were laughing, everyone was having a good time, and for a few hours, I let myself relax, let myself believe that everything was okay. But then, in a moment that seemed almost too trivial to mean anything, I saw something that shook me. Stephanie was in the kitchen, showing her phone to one of our friends, laughing about something. I happened to walk past just as her screen lit up with a new message. It read, "I love you more." It was from someone named Ryan. I remember feeling my heart stop for a second. When she saw me looking, she quickly pulled her phone back, a slight blush on her face. I asked, trying to keep my voice light, "Who's Ryan?" She laughed, a little too loudly, and said, "Oh, that's just Ryan from work. He's been going through some tough times, and I've been helping him out. It's just an inside joke." She even added a casual shrug, like it was the most harmless thing in the world. I tried to smile, to play along, but inside, something broke. I knew Stephanie well enough to tell when she was hiding something, and this was one of those times. But with everyone around, with our daughter's special day unfolding, I didn't push further. I told myself I was overreacting, reading into things that weren't there. After all, we had a family, a life we'd built together over years. Why would I question her now? For the rest of the party, I tried to act normal, laughing and chatting with everyone, but my mind kept drifting back to that message. "I love you more." It wasn't just the words, but the tone of it, the kind of thing you'd say to someone you're close to, too close. That night, after we'd cleaned up and the kids were finally asleep, I found Stephanie sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone again. I tried to bring it up, tried to ask about Ryan in a way that didn't sound accusing. I didn't want to be that husband, the one who hovers and questions, so I approached it casually. "Hey, about that text from Ryan earlier. It just surprised me. I didn't know you two were that close." She looked up, caught off guard, then let out a sigh. "Oh, Daniel, you're not jealous, are you?" she said with a smirk that felt entirely out of place. I shrugged, trying to laugh it off. "No, it just..." Looked a little personal, that's all. She rolled her eyes and shook her head. Daniel, you're overthinking this. He's just a friend. I'm just trying to help him out. That's all. She leaned over and gave me a quick peck on the cheek, dismissing my concerns as if they were laughable. But her reaction only made things worse. It wasn't her words. It was the way she said them. Quick, dismissive, like she'd rehearsed it in her mind beforehand. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, something that didn't go away even after she'd gone to bed. That night, as I lay there in the dark, listening to the soft sounds of her breathing beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Days passed, but the doubt lingered. Stephanie became more distant, more evasive. She'd stay out late, saying she was catching up on work. She'd cancel our plans last minute, saying she was too tired or just not in the mood. Our conversations grew short, almost scripted, as if we were two strangers going through the motions of being married. Then one evening, about 2 weeks later, I decided to check our shared Google account, where all of our photos synced. It was something I did now and then, looking through family photos as a way to relax. But that night, I saw something that made my heart pound. Among the familiar photos of our kids and family gatherings were a few pictures I hadn't seen before. Pictures of Stephanie at a fancy restaurant I'd never heard her mention, smiling brightly, looking more alive than she had in months. And there, next to her in every single photo, was a man I didn't recognize. He was about my age, maybe a bit younger, with dark hair and a cocky grin that made my stomach turn. They looked comfortable together, too comfortable. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the pieces of my life fall apart one by one. This wasn't just helping out a friend. This was something deeper, something that had been going on behind my back for who knows how long. Every missed date night, every late work meeting, every time she'd canceled plans. All of it started making sense. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was one I couldn't bear to look at. I didn't know what to do. I felt paralyzed, trapped in my own home, in a marriage that suddenly felt like a lie. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I also feared what those answers might be. This was the woman I'd built my life with, the mother of my children. If this was real, if she had truly been lying to me, then everything I'd believed in was about to come crashing down. I spent that night awake, sitting alone in the dark, waiting for her to come home, unsure if I was ready for the truth, but knowing I couldn't keep living this way. Stephanie came home late that night, around midnight. I could hear her fumbling with her keys, her footsteps uncertain, as she tried to navigate the quiet house without waking anyone. I sat in the dark, waiting, listening to each creak of the floorboards as she made her way toward the living room where I was sitting. She didn't notice me at first, so I had a chance to really look at her. Her makeup was slightly smudged, her hair tousled, and her expression content, almost blissful. She hadn't looked at me that way in months. When she finally saw me, she froze, her hand tightening around her purse. "Daniel, what are you doing up?" I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm despite the storm inside me. "I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd wait up for you." She forced a smile, that same casual, dismissive one she'd been giving me lately. "You didn't have to do that. I was just out with some friends." "Were you?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Or were you with him?" Her face changed, just for a second. A flicker of shock or maybe guilt. Then she rolled her eyes, as if I were a child accusing her of something ridiculous. "Daniel, not this again. I told you, Ryan is just a friend." "Then explain these." I opened my phone, showing her the pictures from our Google account. Pictures of her at that restaurant, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in ages, with Ryan sitting beside her, his arm draped casually around her shoulder. The color drained from her face. She looked down, taking a deep breath, and then gave a small, almost defiant shrug. "Fine. Yes, we went out. But it's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I almost laughed. "Stephanie, he's got his arm around you in nearly every photo. You're smiling like you're on a date. How is that not what I think?" She crossed her arms, her face hardening. "Do you want the truth, Daniel? Do you really want to hear it?" My heart pounded. Part of me didn't want to know, didn't want the confirmation that this nightmare was real. But I nodded. "Yes, Tell me the truth. She sighed, dropping her purse onto the coffee table, then sat down on the couch, as far from me as possible. Look, I didn't plan for this to happen, okay? Ryan and we just got close. We work together, we talk about everything, and somewhere along the line it turned into more. So it's not just friendship, I said quietly, feeling the ground disappear beneath me. She shrugged. I didn't say that. We haven't crossed any lines, not physically. It's just emotional. Emotional. The word felt like a slap in the face. She didn't need to say anything else. In some ways, an emotional affair hurt worse because it meant she'd shared parts of herself with him that she used to share with me. All those late nights, those work projects. They were just excuses to be with him, to build something with him instead of working on us. So, what does that mean for us? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She met my gaze, and for a moment, I thought I saw regret. But then, with that same detached tone she'd used before, she said, I don't know. I'm just tired, Daniel. Tired of trying so hard to be happy when it never seems to work. The way she said it, it was like she was blaming me, as if I'd somehow failed her, as if this was my fault. I felt anger rise up in me, a raw, helpless fury. So that's it then? You're just going to give up? I don't know what else to do, she replied, crossing her arms again. I need more than this, more than what we have. I stared at her, disbelief mixing with heartbreak. How could she say that after everything we'd been through, everything we'd built together? But no matter what I said, no matter how much I tried to make her understand what this was doing to me, to our family, she was unmoved. It was like she'd already made her decision, and I was just catching up. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and pain. Stephanie insisted that nothing physical had happened, that she and Ryan hadn't crossed that line. But with every excuse she gave, every half-hearted explanation, I knew she was holding something back. Our conversations became tense, clipped, filled with silences where warmth used to be. We'd go through the motions, making dinner, taking care of the kids, pretending everything was fine. But underneath, we both knew it wasn't. Then one night, after she'd gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, scrolling through my thoughts and trying to make sense of everything. That's when it hit me, I could check our phone records. I knew it wasn't exactly a trusting move, but at this point, trust was out the window. I opened the records, and what I saw made my stomach twist. There were dozens of calls and texts between her and Ryan, mostly at odd hours, late at night, during times when she told me she was working late. And it wasn't just a recent thing. This had been going on for months. Every excuse she'd given, every canceled date, every work trip. It all led back to him. The next morning, I confronted her with the phone records, my voice shaking as I demanded an explanation. She just sat there, staring at me with this blank, almost resigned expression. Daniel, I told you it's not physical, she repeated, as if that was supposed to make everything okay. We just talk. He listens to me in a way you don't. That hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd spent years being there for her, supporting her, building a life with her. And now she was telling me that all of that meant nothing because of some guy who listened. I felt a mixture of anger and sadness that's hard to put into words. Do you even care about what this is doing to us? To our family? I asked, barely keeping it together. She shrugged, looking away. I don't know. I don't know what I feel anymore. In that moment, I realized that I was more invested in saving our marriage than she was. I wanted answers, closure, something to help me make sense of the betrayal. But she was indifferent, as if she'd already emotionally checked out. It was like the Stephanie I knew was gone, replaced by someone who saw our life together as disposable. Over the next few days, I started talking to a lawyer, preparing myself for the possibility that this was the end. Stephanie continued seeing Ryan, barely hiding it now, like she wanted me to know. I started noticing more. The time she spent on her phone, the way she'd come home later and later, the way she'd snap at me for the smallest things, as if I was the one inconveniencing her. She didn't apologize, didn't show an ounce of remorse. She'd made her choice and I was left with the fallout. It's hard to describe the pain of watching the person you love drift away, of realizing that you're not enough for them anymore. I wanted to fix it, to make things right, but I couldn't fix something she didn't care about saving. And then, as if to twist the knife further, I discovered that she'd started introducing our kids to Ryan, calling him just a friend, and bringing him along on outings without my knowledge. I found out through a conversation with my son, who mentioned how funny Mom's friend Ryan was. I confronted her, furious, but she brushed it off, saying it was harmless. "They like him," she said coldly, like she was talking about a babysitter, not a man who'd driven a wedge through our marriage. "It's good for them to know there are other people in my life." That was it, the moment I knew there was nothing left to save. The realization that she had brought Ryan into our kids' lives broke something deep inside me. It wasn't just about us anymore. It was about them, about the family we had built together, and how easily she seemed willing to let it all unravel. I felt trapped, crushed under the weight of trying to protect our kids from a reality they couldn't possibly understand, and a marriage that had been a lie for longer than I cared to admit. After that conversation, things between Stephanie and me were tense, to say the least. She would come home late, sometimes not at all, giving me some vague excuse that she had to work late or needed a night to herself. Every time, I'd stand there, numb, watching her leave as if she was simply running out for groceries. She was unapologetic, almost defiant, acting as though this was somehow my fault, as though I had failed her so deeply that she had no choice but to abandon everything we'd built. One evening, after the kids were asleep, I was sitting in the dark, a glass of whiskey in my hand, trying to dull the ache that had become my constant companion. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Stephanie. She wasn't even bothering to come home that night. No explanation, just a cold, clipped message. "I'll be back in the morning." Felt like the final insult. She couldn't even tell me to my face, couldn't even pretend to care about the family waiting for her at home. I was furious, devastated. I wanted to scream, to break something, to do anything to release the pain and anger coursing through me. Instead, I went into our bedroom, opened her closet, and started packing her things. I wasn't thinking clearly, but I was tired of living in limbo, tired of pretending that this was salvageable. I knew that our kids would wake up confused, maybe even scared, but I couldn't stand another day of this charade. If she wanted a different life, a life with him, then she could have it, but she wasn't going to drag me and the kids along for the ride. The next morning, Stephanie walked in, looking as though she'd just had a restful night. She saw the boxes and bags and froze, her face twisting with anger and surprise. "What the hell is this, Daniel?" she asked, her voice icy. "This is me finally standing up for myself," I said, keeping my voice calm. "If you're so unhappy, if he means so much to you, then leave. Stop dragging us all through this misery." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you serious? You're throwing me out." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was saying, but I couldn't stop now. "I'm not throwing you out. I'm giving you what you want. Go. Be with him. But don't expect me to sit here and watch as you dismantle everything we've built." For a moment, she looked almost vulnerable, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. But then her expression hardened, and she laughed. A short, bitter sound. "Fine, if that's how you want it." She walked over to the boxes, picked one up, and started carrying it to her car without another word. I watched her, feeling a mixture of relief and agony as she loaded up her things. Felt surreal, like an out-of-body experience. This was the woman I had planned to grow old with, the mother of my children, the person I had trusted more than anyone in the world. And here she was, walking away with barely a backward glance. When she'd taken the last box, she stood in the doorway for a moment, looking back at me. "You know, this is probably for the best," she said coldly. "We both deserve to be happy." I didn't reply, couldn't. I just stood there, letting her words wash over me, feeling the hollowness of everything we'd once had. And with that, she turned and walked out, leaving me alone in the empty, silent house. The days that followed were the hardest of my life. I kept busy with the kids, trying to shield them from the reality of what was happening, telling them that Mommy was taking a little time for herself. They were too young to understand, and I didn't have the words to explain what had happened. All I knew was that I had to keep going, to be there for them, even though every part of me felt shattered. It was around this time that I learned the truth of what had driven Stephanie away. One night, I got a message from an unknown number. It was Ryan. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. The message was brief, and it changed everything. Thought you should know. Stephanie left you because she was sick, not because of me. She didn't want you to know. I stared at the message, disbelief and confusion swirling in my mind. Sick? I hadn't seen any signs that Stephanie was unwell. No hints of anything that might have explained her behavior. But I knew Ryan wasn't lying. There was a sincerity to the message, a strange kind of guilt, as if he was trying to clear his conscience. I sat there for hours trying to piece it together. Had Stephanie really left me because she was sick? Was that why she'd become so distant, so emotionally detached? The idea seemed impossible, absurd even, but a part of me knew it was true. All the pieces suddenly fell into place. The late nights, the sudden need for space, the emotional walls she'd put up. I'd assumed it was another man, and while that had been partly true, there was so much more to the story. The next day, I confronted Stephanie, determined to get the truth. I found her at a coffee shop where she often went, sitting alone, looking tired and worn in a way I hadn't seen before. She looked up as I approached, her expression unreadable. "Daniel," she said, her voice flat. "What do you want?" I took a deep breath, sitting down across from her. "I got a message from Ryan," I said, watching her carefully. He told me you're sick." For a moment, she didn't respond. She just stared at her coffee, her fingers wrapped tightly around the cup. Then, finally, she nodded. "Yes, I was diagnosed 2 years ago. It's serious. I didn't want you to know because I didn't want you to worry. I thought I could handle it on my own. But instead, you pulled away from us." I finished, my voice thick with emotion. "You let me believe it was something else. You let me believe it was all because of him." She shrugged, looking almost defeated. "It was easier that way. Easier to let you think I was a bad person than to see me as someone who was weak or broken." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had let me spiral, let me live with the anger and betrayal, all because she didn't want me to know the truth. I didn't know whether to feel sympathy or anger, relief or betrayal. All I knew was that the woman I'd once loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't understand. We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of everything between us settling like stones. Eventually, I stood up, knowing that there was nothing left to say. I left her there in that coffee shop, feeling a mixture of sadness and closure. Stephanie and I weren't just broken. We were beyond repair. She had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. After that last conversation with Stephanie, something inside me shut off. I think part of me had still held on to the hope that there was an explanation that would make it all make sense, something that could pull us back together. But hearing the truth just left me hollow. I was left with a shattered marriage, 2 confused kids, and the knowledge that the woman I'd once loved had chosen to keep me in the dark. Not just about her affair, but about her health, too. The lies and betrayal felt like scars that were never going to fade. Days turned into weeks, and life became a series of motions. Wake up, get the kids ready, drop them off, work, bring them home, make dinner, and try to fill the silence that Stephanie left. People asked where she was, and I'd give some vague explanation about spending time on her own. The kids started asking too, their little faces confused and hurt, and I could only tell them that Mommy needed some time alone. I hated lying, but the truth was too messy, too painful for them to understand. One night, as I was tucking my son in, he looked up at me with wide, worried eyes and asked, "Is Mommy coming back?" It was a simple question, but it broke me. I choked back the answer I wanted to give and instead pulled him close, promising him that everything would be okay. But the truth was, I didn't know what okay would look like anymore. Then, as if fate hadn't already dealt me enough, I got another call from Stephanie. 5 years had passed since we'd separated, years that had worn on me, left me wondering if I'd ever truly move on. By then, I'd begun rebuilding my life, focusing on the kids, my work, trying to find myself again. But hearing her voice on the other end of the line brought everything rushing back, every hurt, every unanswered question, all the bitterness I thought I'd left behind. "Daniel," she said, her voice soft but steady. I know this is unexpected, but I need to talk to you. I didn't answer immediately, too stunned to know how to respond. Stephanie, I don't know what you want me to say. She sighed, a sound so familiar it hurt. Just hear me out. I think I owe you that. So I listened. She told me that the illness she'd been diagnosed with had eventually gone into remission. I didn't think it would, she said, her voice catching. For a long time, I didn't see a future for myself. I thought leaving would make it easier. For you, for the kids. I didn't want you to go through everything with me. I felt a flare of anger rise in my chest. So you left because you were sick? Do you know how insane that sounds, Stephanie? How much that hurt, thinking you just left because I wasn't enough. She was silent for a moment, and I could hear her breathing, steady but hesitant. I was scared, Daniel. Scared of needing someone, of losing control. I didn't want you to see me like that, to be weighed down by something that might not end well. I thought I was doing you a favor. I could barely believe what I was hearing. She'd abandoned our family, lied, had an affair. All because she thought it would help us? I didn't know whether to feel pity or fury. And Ryan? I asked, my voice cold. Was he just part of your favor to me? No, he wasn't, she admitted, and I could hear the guilt in her tone. I used him. I know that now. I didn't want to be alone, but I didn't want to let you in either. I know it was wrong, Daniel, and I've lived with that regret every day. There was a long silence between us, a chasm of words left unspoken, and I knew that I couldn't go back, couldn't pretend that the person I'd loved was still there. She had left a long time ago, and even now, with her explanations and apologies, I could feel that the gap between us was insurmountable. Stephanie, I said finally, my voice steady but distant. You've said your piece, and I've listened, but I've moved on. You left, and I did the best I could for the kids. They're happy, stable. They don't need more chaos in their lives. She took a shaky breath, and for a moment, I thought I heard her stifling tears. I know I can't make things right, she said softly, but maybe we could try to be friends? For the kids, at least. I paused, thinking about everything we'd been through. After all the lies, the betrayal, the damage done, I wasn't sure friendship was even possible. But maybe, for the sake of our kids, it could be worth trying. So I agreed, reluctantly, telling her we could start by setting up regular visits with the kids, a way for her to be in their lives without disrupting the stability they'd finally found. The first visit was awkward, to say the least. The kids were excited to see her, not fully understanding the changes that had happened but thrilled to have Mommy back, even if only for a few hours. I stood back, watching her with them, seeing glimpses of the woman I'd once loved and the person she had become. It was strange, like looking at a ghost of someone who'd once been everything to me. Over time, we found a sort of rhythm, an arrangement that allowed her to be present without reopening old wounds. She visited the kids every few weeks, keeping her distance from me but making an effort to reconnect with them. It was hard at first, but eventually, I came to accept it, to see it as a way to give our kids some sense of family, even if it wasn't the one I'd envisioned. Looking back now, I can't say I've fully forgiven her. Some wounds are too deep to heal completely, but I've made peace with it. I've moved forward, found happiness in the life I've rebuilt, and focused on giving our kids a stable, loving home. Stephanie remains a part of their lives, but she's a distant figure in mine, a shadow of a love that once was. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that life is messy, unpredictable, and sometimes cruel. People make choices, good or bad, and those choices have consequences we have to live with. If anyone reading this has found themselves in a similar situation, wondering if they'll ever make it through, I can tell you this. It gets better. Maybe not right away, maybe not even for a long time, but it does. You find strength you didn't know you had, and you rebuild. Piece by piece, day by day, until the pain fades and you're left with something new, something that's yours alone. So that's my story. It's not the one I planned, but it's the one I've lived. And I've come to accept it, knowing that even through the heartbreak, I found a way forward. As months went by, our arrangement settled into something almost routine. Stephanie saw the kids every few weeks, picking them up for a day out or sometimes staying for dinner if they asked. I'd watch from the doorway as they left, feeling a strange mix of relief and discomfort. I was glad that they were reconnecting with her, that they could still have some semblance of a relationship with their mother. But seeing her, even in those brief moments, reopened old wounds, reminding me of everything we'd been through. At first, every visit felt like a test of endurance, a struggle to maintain composure. The kids would come home excited, chattering about all the things they'd done, and while I listened and smiled, I couldn't ignore the resentment that still lingered inside me. Part of me hated that she could waltz in and out of their lives so easily, without fully facing the consequences of her actions. I struggled with the feeling that she didn't deserve their innocence, their trust. But I kept those feelings to myself, knowing they needed to be free to love her without my bitterness tainting their relationship. One evening, as the kids played in the backyard, Stephanie and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen. The silence was thick, uncomfortable, filled with things we couldn't or wouldn't say. She was washing dishes, staring out the window at the kids, and for the first time in years, I saw something in her face that resembled regret. "They're growing up so fast," she said softly, breaking the silence. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "They are." She looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly as she dried a glass. "I missed a lot of moments. I know I wasn't there the way I should have been." It was the closest thing to an apology she'd ever offered, but it barely scratched the surface. I wanted to tell her everything I'd kept inside. The nights I stayed up worrying, the loneliness, the sense of betrayal that had become a permanent part of me. I wanted her to understand the depth of the damage she'd done. But as I stood there, looking at her, I realized that no words could change the past. No amount of anger or blame could undo the choices she'd made. "Stephanie," I said, keeping my voice steady, "what's done is done. I'm not looking for an apology. I'm just focused on making sure the kids are okay." She nodded, her face blank, but I could see a flicker of pain in her eyes. Maybe she really did feel regret. Maybe she really did understand, finally, the magnitude of her choices. But it didn't matter anymore. I'd moved on, or at least I was learning to. I didn't need her guilt. I didn't need her to make amends. I just needed to keep building the life I'd started without her. As weeks turned into months, I found myself embracing the quiet rhythms of our new life. I'd filled the house with memories that were mine alone. Camping trips with the kids, weekend movie marathons, new recipes we'd tried and failed to make. The empty spaces she'd left were gradually being filled with moments that felt whole, untainted. Eventually, I even started dating again. It was strange at first, navigating the world of relationships after years of marriage, but it was also refreshing. I was no longer the man I'd been before Stephanie left. I'd grown, changed, learned to stand on my own 2 feet without needing someone else to complete me. I'd become stronger, not in spite of the pain but because of it. A few months after I began seeing someone, Stephanie found out. She never mentioned it directly, but I noticed a change in her, an awkwardness, maybe even a bit of jealousy. She'd linger a bit longer when she dropped off the kids, ask questions about what we'd been up to, as though trying to piece together the parts of my life she no longer had access to. It was almost surreal watching her react, knowing that I'd finally reached a point where I was no longer tied to her. Then came a day I never expected. She asked if we could have a private conversation. We met at a quiet cafe, away from the kids and the routine of pickups and drop-offs. She looked nervous, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup as if she were holding on for dear life. "I wanted to tell you, I'm truly sorry, Daniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know it doesn't make up for anything, but I need you to know that I regret everything. The way I handled things, the lies, leaving you to pick up the pieces. I was wrong." Hearing those words brought a strange sense of relief. I didn't feel anger or satisfaction, just a quiet acknowledgement that this was the closure I'd been searching for all along. I'd wanted her to face what she'd done, to understand the impact of her choices, not because it would change anything but because it meant that I hadn't gone through it all in vain. "Thank you," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "I appreciate you saying that." She nodded, looking down, as though there were more she wanted to say but couldn't find the words. I realized then that I didn't need anything else from her. I didn't need explanations, reasons, or justifications. I had everything I needed in the life I'd rebuilt, in the laughter of my kids, in the quiet peace I'd found after so much turmoil. We parted ways that day as two people who had shared a life but were now strangers, linked only by the memories we had and the children we'd raised. And as I walked away from that cafe, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a burden I'd carried for too long. I'd forgiven her, not for her sake, but for mine. Today I'm finally free. Free from the bitterness, the resentment, the constant replaying of what went wrong. I'm a different man now, shaped by the pain but not defined by it. I've learned that healing isn't about erasing the past but about accepting it and moving forward with strength and resilience. If there's one piece of advice I'd give to anyone going through the kind of betrayal I faced, it's this. Don't let someone else's choices dictate your happiness. You're stronger than you think. You'll survive, you'll heal, and one day you'll find yourself standing on the other side, grateful for the journey that made you who you are. In the months that followed that conversation with Stephanie, I felt like I'd crossed a threshold. After years of living with questions, pain, and unspoken words, I finally had peace. I'd never imagined myself getting here, never thought I'd be able to look back on the marriage and feel neutral. Not anger, not resentment, but simply acceptance of what had happened, and a sense of gratitude for what I'd built since. I started leaning more into the life I'd created for myself. With Stephanie out of the picture, I'd had to become a different kind of father, more present, more hands-on. Our routine as a family felt simple but fulfilling. The kids and I took on little projects together, building a treehouse in the backyard, redecorating their rooms, finding new hobbies to share. I watched them grow, thriving in a home filled with stability and warmth, and it made me proud. I was creating a life where they felt safe, loved, and free to be themselves, without the shadows of our past looming over them. My social circle expanded too. Friends who had stood by me through the chaos of the divorce reappeared, inviting me to gatherings, checking in on me. I started letting them in slowly at first, going out for a beer, joining them for a hiking trip. I'd forgotten what it felt like to just enjoy, to be carefree. One weekend, they convinced me to go camping with them, a getaway I'd originally hesitated about, thinking of all the reasons I shouldn't leave the kids. But the kids, in their innocent wisdom, had insisted I go, practically pushing me out the door with their excited little cheers of "Have fun, Dad." I spent that weekend under the stars, laughing around the campfire, feeling a joy I hadn't felt in years. I realized then that I'd spent so much time trying to keep everything under control, to maintain an image of stability for the kids, that I'd forgotten to enjoy life myself. That weekend, surrounded by friends who reminded me of the person I used to be, I felt a piece of myself return. Coming home, I felt lighter, more at peace. The kids could sense the change. They started asking me about the trip, excited to hear every little detail, and I noticed how much they enjoyed seeing me happy. It was as if my joy reflected back on them, showing them that even through difficult times, happiness was possible. It was a valuable lesson not just for them but for me. Then, about a year after Stephanie's apology, I met someone new. Her name was Rachel. She was different from Stephanie in every way. Open, honest, warm-hearted. I met her at a friend's party, and we hit it off instantly. She wasn't just beautiful. She had a presence that made everyone around her feel valued. We talked late into the night, sharing stories and laughing like old friends. I was hesitant at first, cautious from all the wounds I'd carried, but there was something about Rachel that felt safe, genuine. Our relationship grew slowly, each of us learning about the other in small, meaningful steps. Rachel knew about my past. I was upfront with her about everything that had happened with Stephanie, and she respected the time I needed to ease into something new. There were no expectations, no demands, just the quiet reassurance that she was there, steady and patient. It felt strange, after so much pain, to trust someone again, to open my heart without fear. But with Rachel, it felt right. She became not just someone I was seeing, but a true partner, someone who saw me, flaws and all, and accepted me. The kids adored her too. She brought a warmth to our home that I hadn't even realized was missing. They'd look forward to her visits, begging her to stay for dinner, to watch movies with us, to join in our little family projects. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a true teammate, someone who was there not just for me, but for all of us. One evening, we were sitting on the porch after the kids had gone to bed, talking about everything and nothing, the way we often did. Rachel took my hand, looked me in the eyes and said, "You know, Daniel, you've built an incredible life. I'm grateful to be part of it." Hearing those words, I felt a wave of emotion that I hadn't expected. I realized that I'd spent so long defining myself by the pain of my past that I hadn't fully appreciated how far I'd come. I'd survived betrayal, rebuilt my life, and found happiness again. And here was someone who saw that journey, who understood the weight of it, and chose to stand by me. A few weeks later, Rachel and I talked about taking the next step. She'd been spending more and more time at the house, and the kids adored her as much as I did. The idea of blending our lives, of creating a new family together, felt right. When I asked the kids how they'd feel about Rachel moving in, they burst into cheers, wrapping us both in hugs that made me realize how far we'd come as a family. Stephanie, meanwhile, remained a part of the kids' lives, though distantly. She'd see them every few weeks, keeping things amicable and polite. There was no hostility between us anymore, just a quiet understanding that we'd both moved on. She knew about Rachel, of course, and while there was a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes when she found out, she accepted it. I think she realized that I'd finally found the happiness she'd taken from me all those years ago. I'll never forget the journey I went through, the years of doubt, the anger, the pain, and the slow, steady process of healing. But now, I see it as something I survived, something that shaped me into a better, stronger version of myself. I've learned that healing doesn't happen overnight. It's a series of small, brave steps that eventually lead you out of the darkness and into something brighter. If anyone out there is reading this, stuck in a place of heartbreak and betrayal, wondering if they'll ever feel whole again, let me tell you, you will. It might take time, more time than you think you have the strength for, but piece by piece, day by day, you'll rebuild. And one day, you'll look around and realize that the life you've created is beautiful in ways you never could have imagined. So here's to new beginnings, to finding love again, and to embracing the life that lies ahead. The pain of the past will always be a part of my story, but it no longer defines me. I'm grateful for where I am, for the family I've built, and for the love I've found. I've learned that life is full of unexpected turns, but if you're brave enough to face them, you'll come out on the other side stronger than ever. And that, I think, is the greatest gift life has given me. Life took on a new rhythm once Rachel moved in. We became a family, our lives meshing together in ways that felt natural and unforced. The kids, who had once known only the tension of a strained marriage, were now surrounded by a home filled with laughter, stability, and love. The old wounds from my life with Stephanie didn't haunt me the way they used to. They were more like scars now, reminders of a difficult past that had ultimately led me here. Rachel's presence brought a lightness to our home that I hadn't even realized was missing. She had this way of making ordinary moments feel special, turning even a simple family dinner into something memorable. The kids would burst through the door after school, eager to share their day, and I'd watch as they pulled her into their excitement, telling her every detail like she was the one person they couldn't wait to see. Watching them together, I knew that they had finally found the stability and love they deserved. Over time, we started to build our own family traditions, things that were ours alone. We'd have Sunday morning pancake breakfasts, everyone crowding into the kitchen to help mix batter and make a mess. Friday nights were for movie marathons, with the kids snuggled under blankets, their laughter filling the room. And Rachel brought her own traditions into our lives too. She introduced us to her family's holiday cookie recipe, complete with a decorating contest that always ended in flower fights and frosting-covered grins. One Saturday morning, Rachel and I were watching the kids play in the yard, their laughter echoing across the lawn. She slipped her hand into mine and looked at me with a warmth that made my heart feel lighter than it had in years. "You've done an amazing job with them, Daniel," she said softly. "They're such incredible kids." I squeezed her hand, feeling a rush of gratitude. "We've done an amazing job, Rachel. You're as much a part of this family as I am." She smiled, a hint of emotion in her eyes. "Thank you. she whispered, and I knew she meant it. She'd stepped into a life that came with its own history, its own scars, yet she'd embraced it all, never shying away from the complexities of my past. As time went on, Rachel and I started talking about making our family official. The kids, who had grown to love her like their own, were more than enthusiastic about the idea. They'd ask her questions about her life, her family, her childhood, wanting to know everything about the woman who had brought so much happiness back into our lives. They started calling her Mom on their own in small moments at first, but then more often until it became natural. One evening, as we were gathered around the dinner table, I looked at my family, our family, and felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Rachel had brought a healing touch into our lives, one that I hadn't even realized we needed. She wasn't just a partner. She was a true mother figure for the kids, a confidant, a friend, and a source of stability. It was then that I knew I wanted to make her role in our lives official. A few weeks later, in a quiet, intimate moment, I asked Rachel to marry me. She said yes, her face lighting up with joy, and the kids, who had been watching from the sidelines, erupted into cheers. It was a moment that felt surreal, like something out of a dream, and as I looked around at the faces of the people I loved, I realized that the brokenness of my past had finally been replaced by a sense of wholeness I hadn't thought possible. Planning the wedding was an adventure in itself. The kids insisted on being involved in every detail, from picking out flowers to designing invitations. They were more excited than we were, counting down the days, talking about their new roles in the family with a pride that melted my heart. And Rachel, ever the calming presence, handled it all with grace, laughing at their excitement, encouraging their ideas, and making them feel like an important part of our special day. We held the wedding in our backyard, a simple ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. The kids stood beside us, grinning from ear to ear, and as Rachel and I exchanged vows, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us here. We weren't just exchanging vows for each other. We were making promises to our children, to our family, to the life we were building together. At the reception, as we celebrated with friends and family, I caught a glimpse of Stephanie standing at the edge of the yard. I hadn't invited her, but I knew she was there for the kids, watching quietly from a distance, her face unreadable. Part of me wondered what she was thinking, if she felt regret or sorrow, but I didn't dwell on it. This day wasn't about the past. It was about the life Rachel and I were choosing to build together, the love we were choosing to carry forward. In the end, I realized that forgiveness was something I had given not just to Stephanie but to myself. I'd let go of the resentment, the bitterness, the hurt that had once defined me. And in doing so, I'd opened myself up to something new, something beautiful. The wedding night was filled with laughter and joy, our backyard glowing with fairy lights and the warmth of everyone who had supported us through our journey. We danced under the stars, surrounded by friends, family, and the two kids who had been my guiding light through every dark day. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. Rachel and I settled into married life with ease. She continued to bring warmth, laughter, and compassion into our home, and together, we built a foundation that felt unbreakable. Stephanie remained a part of the kids' lives, but I no longer felt haunted by her presence. I had let go of the pain, the questions, the need for closure. I'd found my answers in the life I'd created, in the family Rachel and I had formed, and in the knowledge that I was finally free. Looking back, I can hardly believe how far we've come. The life I thought had been broken beyond repair had transformed into something beautiful, something whole. And while the scars of my past are still there, they are part of my story, a story of resilience, healing, and love. So here we are, years after the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the struggle to rebuild. I can look at Rachel, our kids, our home, and feel a happiness that is pure and untainted. I am grateful for every step that brought me here, for every lesson learned, for every tear shed, and for every moment of joy that followed. The pain of the past is behind me, and the future is full of promise, held together by love and the family we have become. And to anyone reading this who may be going through their own journey of heartbreak, keep going. The road may be hard, but I promise, there's light on the other side. One day, you'll look back and realize that the life you've created is stronger, more resilient, and more beautiful than anything you could have imagined. And that, my friends, is worth every single step. Years have passed since Rachel and I started our life together, and it feels as if the pain and turmoil of my past belong to a different lifetime. Our children are older now, growing into their own personalities, with their own dreams and goals. They carry themselves with a sense of confidence, a kind of lightness that, looking back, I'm not sure they would have had if Rachel hadn't come into our lives. It's a beautiful thing to see. To know that they're growing up in a home filled with love, laughter, and the kind of stability that Stephanie and I couldn't give them. Stephanie remains a quiet, distant part of their lives, and I've come to terms with that. She sees them occasionally, keeps things cordial, but there's a distance there, an unspoken understanding that our family unit has changed, evolved into something new. I don't hold resentment toward her anymore. I've let go of the need for apologies or explanations. She's part of my story and a part of my children's lives, but her influence doesn't extend beyond that. Rachel and I talk about our past sometimes, the way we've both healed from the difficult roads we've traveled. She's had her own struggles, her own experiences with love and loss, and that's part of what makes our bond so strong. We understand each other's scars, but we don't let them define us. Instead, we've built something new, something that feels resilient because of what we've both overcome. One evening, after the kids have gone to bed, Rachel and I sit out on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars in silence. It's a quiet, peaceful moment. One of those times when words aren't necessary because everything you need to say has already been understood. I think back to how much has changed, how far I've come from those nights of heartache and confusion, wondering if I'd ever find peace again. Now, sitting here with Rachel, with our kids sound asleep inside, I realize that I found everything I was looking for and more. Do you ever think about how we got here? She asks, breaking the silence, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the porch light. I nod, squeezing her hand. All the time, I say with a smile, I used to think my story was over, that I'd lost my chance at a happy life. But then you showed me that there was so much more waiting for me. She leans her head on my shoulder, her hand resting on mine, a quiet, grounding presence that I've come to cherish. We've both come a long way, haven't we? Yes, I reply, my voice barely a whisper, and I wouldn't trade a single moment. We sit there for a long time, wrapped in each other's warmth, watching the stars above. There's a deep sense of peace that fills me, a kind of contentment that I once thought was lost forever. I realize now that the journey, as painful as it was, led me exactly where I was meant to be. And for the first time, I can honestly say that I'm grateful for every step, every lesson, every tear. It all brought me here, to a life richer and more fulfilling than anything I could have imagined. Life, I've learned, has a way of surprising us. Tears us down, but it also builds us back up, often in ways we never expected. I'm a stronger, better person than I was back then, a better father, a better partner. And most importantly, I'm happy, truly deeply happy. The kind of happiness that comes not from perfection, but from the beauty of resilience, from the strength it took to rebuild, to believe in love and life again. So here I am, finally at peace, finally whole, with a heart that's healed, a family that's thriving, and a future that's filled with promise. To anyone who may be reading this, I hope my story shows you that it's possible to find happiness on the other side of heartbreak. It's possible to rebuild, to love again, and to create a life that's even more beautiful than the one you lost. And if you're going through that dark place right now, know that there's a light waiting for you. Keep going, because one day you'll look back and realize that you've created something extraordinary. And that, I think, is the true gift life has to offer.